The royal palace of the Kingdom of Aziza gleamed under the blazing midday sun, its terracotta walls and intricately carved pillars a testament to the king's wealth and power. Yet, within its splendor, a shadow of despair clung to the young maid, Neka, whose movements were as graceful as they were burdened. Neka was not just any maid. She possessed a beauty that rivaled the finest silk worn by the queens. But her eyes held the perpetual sorrow of one who knew her fate was sealed by an unbreakable hierarchy. Every sweeping motion of her broom and every perfectly placed water pitcher was a silent scream against her station. She often paused by the tall, latticed windows, gazing out at the distant, rolling savanna, imagining herself running free, her laughter echoing amongst the baobab trees. That world, however, was a lifetime away, replaced by the suffocating opulence of her gilded prison. The oppressive heat of the day only mirrored the pressure building in her chest, a constant, heavy dread that came with her close proximity to the inner sanctum of the royal family. She served the Queen Mother, Adana, a woman whose gaze could wither crops and whose voice was rarely heard without a sting. The maid knew her purpose was to be invisible, to serve and never question, yet the fire of a young woman's dreams still flickered stubbornly within her, threatening to consume the facade of quiet servitude she carefully maintained. It was during the evening meal preparations that the forbidden connection was first truly forged, a moment of profound silence cutting through the clatter of bronze trays and the hushed gossip of the other servants. Neka was arranging a platter of fufu when she looked up and her breath hitched. Standing by the entrance of the royal dining hall was Prince Sakura, the king's eldest son, his stature regal, and his gaze surprisingly gentle, completely unlike the stern, demanding presence of his father. He was speaking to a military aide, but his eyes were drawn inexorably to Neka. Their eyes met across the vast, polished floor, a connection swift and devastating, like a sudden flash of lightning in a dry season. In that instant, Neka saw not the future king, but a lonely young man. And Sakura saw not a mere servant, but the sun captured in a woman's dark eyes. The moment lasted no more than a few heartbeats, yet it was enough to ignite a dangerous hope in Neka, a hope that was immediately followed by a chilling wave of fear. She quickly averted her gaze, her hands trembling as she focused on the task, knowing that such a glance was treasonous. Prince Sakura, too, felt the jolt. He paused his conversation mid-sentence, the aide looking at him quizzically, but the prince simply shook his head, his mind already spinning with the reckless, wonderful possibility of seeking out the maid again. The clandestine meetings began under the cover of the thick, moonless nights, using the ancient palace gardens as their sanctuary, a place where the scent of jasmine and earth masked their whispers. The secrecy was a thrilling, terrifying blanket around them. Neka would slip away from the crowded maidens' quarters long after the last oil lamp was extinguished, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs that she feared would betray her. She would find Sakura waiting for her beneath the sprawling Irako tree, its shadow swallowing their forms. The prince, shedding his royal arrogance, spoke to her not of kingdom affairs or battles, but of his dreams, of reforming the kingdom, of a life free from the suffocating weight of tradition, and most poignantly, of her. He would hold her hands calloused from work and promise her a future, swearing on the spirits of his ancestors that he would break the rules for her, that he would make her his true queen regardless of the counsel of his father the king. Neka allowed herself to be swept away, allowing the torrent of his affection to drown out the practical, fearful voice in her mind, believing truly that the love of a prince could defy the laws of the land and elevate a poor palace maid. Their secrecy, however, was fragile, built on the shifting sands of palace intrigue. The other maids and servants were not blind, and the air of happiness and distraction about Neka began to attract envious and suspicious glances. It was Obiagili, the head chambermaid, a woman whose loyalty was to Queen Mother Adana above all else, who first put the pieces together. She had seen the dust of the Irako leaves clinging to the prince's sandals on mornings when he was meant to be studying scriptures. Obiagili watched Neka with the cold, calculating patience of a leopard stalking its prey, waiting for a definitive sign of the illicit romance that would serve as the key to her own advancement within the Queen Mother's favor. One night, she followed Neka, hiding behind the high hibiscus hedges, her breath held tight as she witnessed the prince placing a small, intricately carved ivory trinket into Neka's palm. A final, undeniable piece of evidence. The chambermaid retreated, a malevolent smile twisting her lips, knowing she now held the power to shatter Neka's world and, in doing so, earn a sizable reward for preserving the purity of the royal lineage. Obiagili wasted no time. Before the sun had fully risen, she was kneeling before Queen Mother Adana, her voice low and filled with feigned remorse as she revealed the depth of Prince Zikora's indiscretion. The Queen Mother listened, her face a mask of terrifying stillness, her eyes narrowing to twin slits of pure, incandescent rage. To her, this was not just a forbidden romance. It was a brazen insult to her bloodline and the divine order of the kingdom. She immediately summoned King Chukwamika, demanding that he deal with the situation with the swift, unforgiving hand of tradition. The king, fearing his mother's wrath more than a rebellion, bowed to her will, his face etched with shame and fury. Neka was summoned to the throne room, not with the gentle tap of a supervisor, but dragged by two royal guards, her terror palpable. The room was oppressively silent, illuminated by slivers of morning light that did nothing to soften the harsh expressions of her accusers. Queen Mother Adana pointed a long, accusing finger at Neka, her voice a low, venomous hiss that echoed off the high ceiling. "You, worthless dust, have dared to defile the sanctity of the prince's lineage with your low-born ambition. For this, the spirits demand payment." As the Queen Mother delivered her scathing indictment, Neka desperately searched the crowd for Prince Zikora, her heart pleading with him to step forward, to uphold the promise he had made under the Irako tree. Zikora was indeed there, standing rigid and pale beside his father, his eyes fixed on the distant wall, refusing to meet Neka's desperate, tear-filled gaze. The weight of his royal duty had crashed down upon him, crushing his reckless love. When King Chukwamika finally turned to his son, demanding a public denial of any serious attachment to the maid, Zikora hesitated for a single, agonizing moment, during which the fate of Neka hung in the balance. Then, the prince cleared his throat, his voice barely a tremor but loud enough for all to hear, echoing the cruel decree of his lineage. "I know this maid only as a servant, father. Her claims of affection are the hysterical fantasies of a desperate woman. I am loyal to Aziza and my betrothal." Neka's world fractured at the sound of his betrayal. The pain was immediate, physical, and absolute, far worse than any beating. She sank to the floor, her tears falling onto the cold stone, a silent, damning indictment of his broken oath. King Chukwamika, his honor momentarily satisfied by his son's retraction, pronounced the sentence, his voice booming with forced righteousness to mask the tension of the scene. The maid's transgression, in the eyes of the palace, had to be erased. To preserve the honor of the crown, the king declared, "You, Neka, shall be cast out from the palace walls forever. You will be stripped of all possessions and banished to the outer wastes. To ever return is to invite death." Queen Mother Adana, however, was not finished. Her cruelty was a weapon honed over decades. She stepped forward, her expensive, beaded sandals whispering on the floor. "And so that the memory of your ambition fades completely, your tongue shall be silenced." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled courtiers and servants. The maid would not only lose her home, but her voice as well, ensuring that the tale of the prince's indiscretion could never be told by the victim. Neka offered no resistance as the guards seized her. She looked one last time at Zikora, her eyes no longer holding love, but a deep, icy well of pure hatred and a promise of retribution that no one in the room could fully comprehend. The banishment was carried out with brutal efficiency. Neka, now stripped down to a simple, coarse cloth, her beautiful braided hair unbound and messy, was forced to walk out of the main gates of the palace at Spearpoint. A small crowd of villagers and servants had gathered, drawn by the grim spectacle, their faces a mix of pity, fear, and morbid curiosity. They watched the once graceful palace maid reduced to a broken, weeping outcast. The guards marched her past the market square, the vibrant noise of commerce and life momentarily silenced by her passage. The weight of every scornful or pitying glance was heavier than any stone placed upon her shoulders. As they passed the boundary markers of the kingdom's protection, the guards gave her a final, violent shove, sending her sprawling into the dry, unforgiving earth of the outer wastes. They turned and marched back without a word. Neko lay there for a long time, the dust of the savannah settling on her tears, the silence of the wilderness vast and terrifying. She raised a shaking hand to her throat, confirming the unbearable reality. Her voice, her ability to scream her innocence, was truly gone. For days, Neko wandered the merciless outer wastes, a desolate expanse of sun-baked earth, thorn bushes, and distant, shimmering mirages. The fierce sun beat down, relentlessly draining the last of her strength. She subsisted on small, bitter berries she recognized from her childhood and sips of muddy, stagnant water found in hidden depressions, but it was not enough. Her spirit, though strong, was being consumed by the physical agony of hunger and thirst. The raw wound of Zikora's betrayal was a constant, burning fever in her mind, a source of pain that paradoxically kept her moving. She would not die a forgotten wretch. Her final moments would be an offering to the gods of vengeance. One evening, huddled beneath the skeleton of a dead tree, she felt her life ebbing away. She thought of the luxury she had served, the cold stone halls, and the prince's false promises, and a new, terrible power welled within her. She crawled to a patch of dark earth, clawing at it with her fingernails until they bled, drawing a final desperate symbol of an oath sworn in blood and dust, an oath to the dark spirits that her pain would not be in vain. As her breathing grew shallow and her sight began to dim, a sudden, unnatural wind rose, whipping the dry leaves around her. The air turned cold, heavy with a scent of smoke and ancient power, the scent of the spirits of the forgotten. Neko raised her head, her eyes, glazed with fever, finding the first star appearing in the twilight sky. She could not speak, but her heart poured out the desperate, final prayer of a wronged soul to the Orishes of retribution. Her inner monologue was a searing declaration. They took my life, my love, and my voice. I will take their peace, their joy, and their future. Let my memory be a curse upon their golden palace. The moment the oath was formed, a sudden, blinding light, emerald green and cold, erupted from the earth beside her, bathing her in its spectral glow. The pain in her body vanished, replaced by a chilling, invigorating emptiness. Neka's physical life ended beneath that indifferent star, but her spirit rose, fully intact and filled with a singular, terrible purpose. The palace maid was gone. The vengeful spirit had been born, and the kingdom of Aziza would soon learn the true cost of a broken royal promise. The initial signs of the curse were subtle, easily dismissed by the rational minds within the palace walls. A sudden, inexplicable chill would sweep through the grand halls, even in the blistering heat of the day, making the servants shiver. Fine silks and tapestries, usually vibrant, seemed to dull, their colors fading as if bleached by an invisible sorrow. The intricate carvings on the pillars appeared to weep, dark moisture seeping from the eyes of ancestral figures. The palace cooks complained of food spoiling far too quickly, even fresh catches turning putrid before they could reach the royal kitchens. A pervasive scent, faint and unsettling, like damp earth mixed with a dying flower, began to linger in the air. These occurrences were whispered about by the lower servants, those closer to the earth and its spirits, attributing them to ill omens or disgruntled ancestors. But the royal family, ensconced in their privilege, scoffed at such superstitions. Only Queen Mother Adana, with her ancient knowledge of the kingdom's mystic ways, felt a prickle of unease. She dismissed it as the anxieties of old age, yet the scent, faint but persistent, stirred a forgotten fear deep within her bones. Prince Zikora, despite his outward display of composure, found his nights tormented. Sleep offered no escape, only a gateway to a recurring, chilling nightmare that left him drenched in sweat. In the dream, he stood in a vast, empty expanse, the sun burning overhead, mirroring the desolate outer wastes. He heard a faint, high-pitched wail carried on the wind, a sound that twisted his gut with guilt. Then, a spectral figure would emerge from the shimmering heat haze. A beautiful, emaciated woman, her eyes burning with an unholy light, her mouth open in a silent scream, her throat a raw, dark wound. It was Neka, no longer the gentle maid he had once loved, but a terrifying apparition, reaching out with ethereal hands, her touch colder than any winter's night. pulling him into an abyss of despair. He would wake with a gasp, his heart hammering, the vividness of the dream clinging to him like a shroud. He tried to rationalize it, to blame it on stress, but a gnawing dread began to settle in his soul. Queen Mother Adana, troubled by the persistent unease and the subtle shifts in the palace's aura, consulted the royal diviner, an ancient, blind woman named Mama Chinyere, whose wisdom was said to pierce the veil between worlds. Mama Chinyere sat cross-legged on a mat, her eyes closed, her gnarled hands casting cowrie shells onto a woven tapestry. Her usually calm demeanor was replaced by a visible tremor, her face contorting with distress. The diviner's voice, when it came, was a low, guttural murmur. "The veil is thin, Queen Mother. A great wrong has been done, a life taken, a promise broken, and a spirit denied its rest. It hungers for vengeance." She spoke of a pale, silent woman, her beauty marred by injustice, her heart a vessel of sorrow and wrath. The cowrie shells spoke of blood, betrayal, and a curse that would cling to the royal house like a shadow. Adana listened, her face paling. The fragments of her memory, the scent, the sudden chills, all coalesced into a horrifying truth. The wronged spirit of Neka, the palace maid, had returned. Beyond the palace walls, the curse began to manifest in more tangible, devastating ways. The fertile lands surrounding Aziza, usually bountiful, began to wither and die, as if touched by an unseen blight. The yam and cassava crops, once green and strong, turned yellow and brittle, their roots rotting in the ground. The corn stalks stood skeletal, their cobs barren, unable to produce even a single grain. The livestock, once fat and healthy, grew gaunt and sick. Goats lay listless, their udders dry, while chickens refused to lay eggs, their feathers ruffled and dull. A pervasive hunger began to creep into the villages. Farmers wept in their fields, their livelihood destroyed, their children's bellies empty. They prayed to the ancestors, offered sacrifices, but the blight continued its relentless spread, defying all remedies. The people began to murmur, their discontent growing louder, linking the strange happenings to the sudden, unexplained disappearance of the beautiful palace maid, Neka. Stories of a wronged spirit began to circulate. King Chukwuemeka, informed of the blighted fields and the growing unrest, raged against the superstition of his people and the fear-mongering of the diviners. He refused to acknowledge any connection to Neka. He convened his council, demanding practical solutions, ordering more resources to the affected villages, sending out royal physicians to examine the crops and livestock, and threatening anyone who spread tales of curses. The king, proud and steeped in the belief of his divine right, could not fathom that a mere maid, cast out and silenced, could wield such a devastating power. He saw it as a challenge to his authority, not a consequence of his actions. Queen Mother Adana tried to impress upon him the gravity of Mama Chinyere's prophecy, but he dismissed her warnings as the ramblings of an old woman, fueled by fear. His pride was a thicker shield than any palace wall. Yet, even as he spoke of logic and order, a tremor of doubt ran through him. The memory of Neka's eyes, filled with hate, lingered at the edge of his consciousness, a ghost in his otherwise pragmatic mind. The drought that followed the blight was even more catastrophic. The life-giving rivers and streams that fed Aziza began to recede, their once robust currents dwindling to sluggish trickles. The communal wells, a source of life and gathering, slowly but surely ran dry. Villagers would lower their buckets, only to pull them back up, empty, their faces etched with despair. The air grew thick with dust, coating everything in a fine, gritty layer. The once lush green landscape turned to a parched, cracked tableau, mirroring the growing desperation in the eyes of the people. Children's laughter, once a constant sound, was replaced by the low hum of thirst and hunger. The bustling markets became quieter, goods fewer, and disputes over the dwindling resources grew more frequent. The water scarcity was a direct, palpable threat, one that even King Chukwuemeka could not deny. He sent out his royal engineers, but they returned defeated, reporting that the very earth itself seemed to be rejecting their efforts. Prince Zikora found himself increasingly isolated. His nightmares intensified, and a constant, phantom chill permeated his chambers, even as the kingdom suffered from the drought's heat. He tried to confide in his betrothed, Princess Kiki, a beautiful but spirited woman from a neighboring kingdom, but she dismissed his worries as a sign of weakness, urging him to focus on their impending marriage. His once strong bond with his father, the king, frayed under the weight of his guilt and the king's obstinacy. Chukwuemeka saw his son's distress as a failure of resolve, not a sign of a troubled conscience. Sakura spent his days walking the deserted palace gardens, the once vibrant flowers now wilting and brown. He saw Neka in every shadow, heard her silent scream in every gust of wind, and his mind began to unravel. He tried to pray, to seek solace in the ancestral shrines, but the spirits felt distant, cold, as if they too had abandoned him, leaving him alone with the crushing weight of his unforgivable betrayal. A strange illness began to spread through the palace, affecting only those who had been present during Neka's banishment, particularly the guards and servants who had carried out the Queen Mother's decree. It began with a persistent cough, then a fever that refused to break, followed by a profound weakness that left them unable to stand. Their skin would turn a ghastly pale, and their eyes would become sunken and shadowed. The royal healers, despite their best efforts and potent concoctions, could not identify the ailment or find a cure. Their traditional remedies, usually effective, failed completely against this unseen affliction. Obiagili, the head chambermaid who had exposed Neka, was among the first and worst affected. Her once sharp eyes were now clouded, her body racked with tremors, her nights filled with spectral whispers. Her last words, before she succumbed to the mysterious illness, were a whispered, terrified plea for forgiveness to a phantom figure, chilling all who heard them and confirming the growing dread that a curse was indeed at play. Despite the growing hardship in the kingdom and the creeping illness within the palace, King Chukwuemeka insisted on hosting a grand feast to celebrate the upcoming marriage of Prince Sakura and Princess Kiki. The feast, meant to project an image of strength and abundance, was a somber affair. The food, though plentiful, seemed bland and tasteless. The music, usually joyful, felt hollow and discordant. The courtiers sat with forced smiles, their eyes darting nervously around the room, keenly aware of the famine outside the walls and the spectral presence that seemed to cling to the very air within. Prince Sakura sat stiffly beside Princess Kiki, unable to touch his food, his gaze distant, haunted by the images of Neka's silent, accusing face. Kiki, frustrated, whispered sharp words about his distraction. As the king raised his goblet to toast the future, a chilling gust of wind swept through the hall, extinguishing all the oil lamps simultaneously, plunging the feast into absolute darkness and deafening silence save for the terrified gasps of the attendees. In the ensuing darkness, a faint, mournful whisper seemed to echo through the hall, a sound not quite human, a lament filled with profound sorrow and chilling anger. It wrapped around them, cold and suffocating. Then, objects began to move, goblets clattered, platters slid off tables, and the heavy throne of King Chukwuemeka slowly, deliberately, scraped across the stone floor as if pushed by an invisible hand. A few brave guards tried to relight the lamps, their hands trembling, but their efforts were futile. The flame would flicker for a moment, then die, as if deliberately snuffed out by an unseen force. A shriek of pure terror erupted from Princess Kiki as she felt an icy touch on her cheek, a touch that left a searing cold mark. She scrambled away from Sakura, accusing him of bringing this evil upon them. King Chukwuemeka, finally, felt true fear. He clutched his chest, his breath catching, as he heard Neka's name whispered by an unseen presence directly into his ear, her voice a silent, chilling roar in his mind. Following the terrifying incident at the feast, King Chukwuemeka, his pride finally shattered, summoned Mama Chinyere once more, this time with a desperate plea for help rather than dismissive defiance. The blind diviner, her face grim, listened patiently to the king's frantic recounting of the events. Her cowrie shells, when she cast them, spoke only of deepening shadows and an insatiable hunger for justice. She confirmed the truth he now dreaded. The spirit of Neka, the palace maid, walks among you. Her banishment and silencing unleashed a force beyond mortal understanding. She seeks balance for the scales of injustice. Mama Chinyere explained that the blight, the drought, the illness, and the torment were all manifestations of Neka's vengeful spirit, slowly but systematically dismantling the kingdom that had wronged her. The only path to appease her, the diviner warned, was true atonement, a public acknowledgement of the wrong done, and a profound, heartfelt act of reconciliation, one that would require the royal family to humble themselves. King Chukwuemeka was paralyzed by this revelation. To admit fault, to publicly apologize to a banished maid, was an unthinkable act for a monarch, a humiliation that would shake the very foundations of his reign. He wrestled with his conscience, torn between saving his kingdom from impending ruin and preserving the pride and perceived infallibility of his throne. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, crushing his resolve. The illness within the palace worsened, claiming more lives. The people outside the walls grew desperate, their pleas for food and water turning into angry demands, their loyalty to the crown eroding with each passing day. He watched his once powerful kingdom crumble around him, his legacy turning to ash. His regality, once a source of strength, now felt like a heavy, suffocating cloak. In his private chambers, the king was no longer a formidable ruler but an old man, broken by fear and guilt, haunted by the silent. Prince Zikora, witnessing the devastation and the king's decline, could no longer bear the burden of his silence. He sought out his father, his face etched with sorrow and a desperate resolve. He confessed everything: the secret meetings, the promises of love and marriage, his true feelings for Nneka, and the agonizing moment he had publicly denied her to save his own skin. The king listened, his eyes closed, the raw honesty of his son's confession tearing at the last vestiges of his own denial. He saw Nneka's pain reflected in Zikora's anguished face. A long silence followed, broken only by the king's heavy sigh. He finally understood the depth of the betrayal, not just of Nneka, but of his son's own heart, and the fatal error in judgment that had led to this curse. Father and son, united by a shared sorrow and the terrifying prospect of their kingdom's end, finally found a semblance of common ground, a desperate resolve to seek atonement, no matter the personal cost. News of the deepening curse, the blight, the drought, and the ghostly occurrences within the palace finally reached Princess Kiki's homeland. Her father, the king of a powerful neighboring kingdom, was gravely concerned. He sent an urgent message to Aziza, demanding the immediate return of his daughter. He would not allow her to marry into a cursed royal house, nor would he risk his own kingdom by association. Kiki, though frightened, felt a strange relief. The idea of marrying a man tormented by a ghost, of becoming queen of a dying kingdom, was not the glorious future she had envisioned. She confronted Zikora, her eyes cold. "Your love for that maid has destroyed everything, Prince. You are no king, and this kingdom is lost." She gathered her few belongings, her face devoid of pity. With a final, disdainful look at the crumbling palace and a dismissive nod to Zikora, Princess Kiki departed from Aziza, her royal escort leaving plumes of dust in their wake, severing the last hope for a powerful alliance. Queen Mother Adana, despite Mama Chinyer's warnings and the increasing signs of the curse, remained stubbornly resistant to the idea of publicly appeasing Nneka's spirit. Her pride was as unyielding as granite. To acknowledge the maid's power, to admit she had made a mistake in condemning her, was an affront to her very being, a challenge to her authority and wisdom as the matriarch of the royal family. She insisted on alternative solutions, urging the king to commission more elaborate cleansing rituals, to consult other diviners, to fight the spirit with stronger magic, rather than concede to its demands. Her fear of losing face, of having her brutal judgment proven wrong, outweighed her concern for the suffering kingdom. She still saw Nneka as an upstart who deserved her fate. But even as she spoke of defiance, her hand trembled, her voice lost some of its usual force. The invisible chill of the palace and the silent, accusing presence of Nneka's spirit were slowly eroding her formidable will. The king, now ravaged by guilt and desperate to save his people, made an unprecedented decision. He stood before the starving, desperate populace, his voice hoarse but firm. In a moment of profound humility, King Chukwuemeka publicly acknowledged the grave injustice done to Nneka, the palace maid. He confessed his error in judgment and the brutality of her banishment. A ripple of shock and then a murmur of sorrow ran through the assembled crowd. Never had a king humbled himself so completely before his people, admitting such a profound wrong. Prince Zecora stood beside his father, his head bowed in shame, his own confession of betrayal echoing in the minds of those who now understood the full tragic scope of the royal deceit. The air crackled with a strange mix of disbelief and a glimmer of hope. The people, battered by the curse, looked to their king, wondering if this act of atonement could truly mend the broken fabric of their world. Following the public proclamation, Mama Chinyere advised a ritual of appeasement that required the king and prince to journey to the very spot where Nneka had been abandoned in the outer wastes. They were to go alone, carrying offerings of peace and a symbolic representation of their remorse, to seek the spirit directly and offer their heartfelt apologies at the place of her demise. The journey was arduous, the sun-baked earth harsh beneath their feet, the desolate landscape a stark reminder of Nneka's final, desperate moments. They carried only their shame and their hope. As they walked, the spirit's manifestations seemed to intensify. Whispers surrounded them, chilling gusts of wind tore at their robes, and phantom images of Nneka, weeping, danced in their peripheral vision. King Chukwuemeka and Prince Zecora pressed on, their resolve strengthened by the growing sense of Nneka's suffering. They knew this was their only path to redemption for themselves and their dying kingdom. They finally reached the spot, marked by the skeletal tree and the small, shallow grave Nneka had scraped in her last moments. The air here was heavy, charged with sorrow and lingering pain. The king and prince knelt, humbling themselves before the very earth that had swallowed Nneka's last breath. They placed their offerings, a golden crown, representing relinquished pride, and a royal scepter, symbolizing misused power. Prince Zecora, his voice thick with tears, spoke directly to the unseen spirit of Nneka. He poured out his heart, begging for forgiveness, confessing his cowardice, and acknowledging the depth of his broken promise. King Chukwuemeka, his own voice breaking, confessed his role in her suffering, expressing profound regret for his callous judgment and his failure to protect an innocent life under his care. As they spoke, the bitter wind began to soften, the oppressive heat began to recede. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from the spot where Nneka had died, a sign that their words were being heard. Back in the palace, Queen Mother Adana, alone in her chambers, was suddenly overwhelmed by a profound, chilling silence. The ghostly whispers and cold gusts that had tormented her vanished. In their place, she felt an unbearable emptiness, a hollowness that seemed to echo Nneka's own despair. She saw, in a flash, Nneka's tear-filled eyes, her silent scream, and the raw wound on her throat. The memory of her own cruelty, her unyielding pride, and the devastating consequences of her actions finally broke through her formidable defenses. A single tear, then another, traced paths down her ancient cheeks. The formidable Queen Mother Adana, for the first time in decades, cried. She wept for Nneka, for her kingdom, and for the monstrous pride that had blinded her to humanity. In that moment of profound vulnerability, a shift occurred. The harsh lines on her face softened, and a quiet, aching sorrow replaced the coldness in her eyes. The spirit of Nneka, even in its vengeance, had finally reached her heart. As King Chukwuemeka and Prince Zecora completed their offerings and heartfelt apologies in the outer wastes, the sky, which had been clear and mercilessly blue for months, began to darken. A single, fat raindrop splattered onto Prince Zecora's upturned face, followed by another, and then a gentle, steady shower that blessed the parched earth. It was a soft, cleansing rain, not a violent storm. The dust began to settle, the dry ground absorbing the precious moisture. The air, heavy with the scent of long-awaited rain and damp earth, felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The king and prince stood, letting the rain wash over them, cleansing not just their bodies but their souls, a tangible sign that Nneka's spirit had, perhaps, acknowledged their sincerity. A faint, ethereal rainbow arced across the distant sky, a silent promise of renewal, a whisper of peace after a long, bitter storm, leaving them with a fragile hope for Aziza's future. When King Chukwuemeka and Prince Zecora returned to Aziza, the air in the palace felt different. The oppressive chill was gone, replaced by a subtle warmth that suggested a gentle, unseen presence. The lingering scent of decay had dissipated, replaced by the faint, fresh scent of rain and damp earth. The wilting tapestries and carvings seemed to regain some of their color and vibrancy. Servants, once afflicted with a mysterious illness, showed signs of recovery. Their fevers had broken, their strength slowly returning, their coughs subsiding, as if the curse had begun to lift. Queen Mother Adana met them at the entrance, her expression soft, her eyes holding a new, profound sorrow and a quiet understanding. There was no anger, only a shared, silent burden of grief and relief. The royal family, though scarred by their ordeal, had begun a slow, painful process of healing. The curse had forced them to confront their deepest flaws and the consequences of their actions. The rain continued for several days, soaking into the thirsty earth, replenishing the dry riverbeds and filling the empty wells. The sound of water, once a forgotten melody, became the heartbeat of the land. Miraculously, the blighted fields began to show signs of life. Tiny, green shoots emerged from the previously barren soil, promising a new harvest, a chance for the people to rebuild their lives. The emaciated livestock, once listless, began to regain their vigor, grazing on the new growth, their bleats and calls a welcome sound of returning life. The famine's grip slowly loosened. The people of Aziza, once desperate and angry, looked upon the revitalized land with awe and gratitude. They understood that the king's confession had appeased the angered spirit. A quiet reverence for Neka, the wronged maid, began to spread through the villages. She was no longer just a ghost, but a symbol of justice, a powerful reminder of the consequences of pride and cruelty. King Chukwuemeka, deeply changed by the ordeal, began to govern with a new sense of humility and compassion. He consulted with his people, listened to their grievances, and sought justice for all. He established new laws to protect the vulnerable, ensuring that no one, regardless of their station, could be unjustly condemned or silenced. He spoke openly of the palace's past wrongs. Prince Zakora, now free from the torment of his nightmares, dedicated himself to serving the kingdom with genuine care. He oversaw the rebuilding of the fields and worked tirelessly with the farmers. The bond between the king and prince, forged in sorrow, became stronger than any royal alliance. They ruled with a wisdom born of suffering, a profound understanding of their responsibilities. The people of Aziza, though forever bearing the scars of the curse, began to trust their monarchy again, seeing in their rulers a newfound empathy and a genuine commitment to justice. In a profound act of public atonement, King Chukwuemeka ordered a memorial erected within the palace grounds, not for a fallen warrior or a revered ancestor, but for Neka, the palace maid. It was a simple, elegant stone carved with an image of a blooming flame tree, symbolizing her brief, vibrant life and her enduring spirit. No name was inscribed, for her voice had been taken. At its unveiling, the entire royal family, including a visibly humbled Queen Mother Adana, stood in solemn silence. Prince Zakora placed a single, freshly bloomed hibiscus flower at its base. The memorial served as a constant reminder within the palace walls, a testament to the power of a wronged spirit, a lesson in humility, and a promise that such injustice would never be allowed again. The unseen presence of Neka's spirit seemed to linger around the memorial, no longer malevolent, but a quiet, watchful guardian, ensuring her sacrifice was never forgotten. Prince Zakora never married. The wound of his betrayal, the memory of Neka's silent scream, had left an indelible mark on his heart, preventing him from ever fully opening himself to love again. He dedicated his life to Aziza, ruling justly and with compassion after his father's passing. He built schools, tended to the poor, and championed the rights of the voiceless, carrying Neka's legacy in his every action. He often visited the memorial in the palace gardens, speaking softly to the empty air, sharing his hopes and fears, seeking a quiet absolution that only Neka's spirit could grant. The people of Aziza revered him as a wise and benevolent king, never fully knowing the depth of the personal sorrow that fueled his tireless devotion to their welfare. In his old age, he would sometimes smile a wistful smile, claiming he felt a gentle, cool hand on his arm during his solitary walks, a faint scent of jasmine, a sign he believed that Neka had finally found her peace and perhaps forgiven him. The story of Neka, the palace maid, and the vengeful spirit that saved Aziza from itself became a cornerstone of the kingdom's oral tradition, passed down through generations. Elders would gather children around crackling fires, weaving the tale with dramatic flair, emphasizing the tragic love, the royal arrogance, and the terrible power of a wronged heart. They spoke of the blight, the drought, and the ghostly visitations not as mere fables, but as real events, powerful historical lessons embedded in the fabric of their land. The story served as a constant reminder of Aziz's past, teaching humility, empathy, and the profound importance of justice, ensuring that no one would ever be forgotten or silenced again. Neka, once an invisible servant, became the most powerful and revered spirit in Aziz's history, her legacy a testament to the enduring human spirit and the sacredness of truth. Each year, on the anniversary of Neka's banishment, the kingdom of Aziza held a solemn festival of atonement, a day of remembrance and reflection rather than joyous celebration. The day began with a communal fast, followed by offerings of grain and water at the memorial in the palace and at the edge of the outer wastes, honoring both the land and the spirit. The current king or queen, along with the royal family, would publicly reaffirm their commitment to justice, reiterating the lessons learned from Neka's tragedy. It was a day for humility, for acknowledging collective and individual failings, and for renewing the promise that Aziza would always strive to be a kingdom where every voice mattered. The festival reinforced the bond between the monarchy and its people, a bond forged in shared suffering and renewed in the ongoing pursuit of righteousness. Even centuries later, faint whispers of Neka's presence continued to echo within the ancient palace walls, particularly in the quietest hours of the night. Sometimes, a gentle breeze would stir the curtains in the old maiden's quarters, carrying the phantom scent of jasmine, a subtle reminder of the maid who once dreamt there. Visitors to the palace would sometimes speak of a fleeting image caught in their peripheral vision, a beautiful woman with sorrowful eyes, her face peaceful but watchful. The royal children were often told of Neka's gentle touch, a cool brush against their skin when they felt lonely or lost, a comforting presence from the kingdom's guardian spirit. The spirit of Neka, no longer vengeful, had become a benevolent protector, her watchful eye ensuring that Aziza would never again stray from the path of compassion and justice. The story of the vengeful spirit of the palace maid transcended the borders of Aziza, becoming a powerful folktale shared across many African kingdoms. It served as a universal lesson for rulers and commoners alike, that true power lay not in suppressing the weak, but in upholding justice and honoring every life. The tale spoke of the devastating consequences of broken promises, the corrosive nature of pride, and the ultimate triumph of truth, even when delivered by a silent spirit. It reminded all who heard it that the spirits of the wronged are powerful, and that even the smallest, most overlooked life can leave an indelible mark on history. Neka's legacy was not one of fear, but of profound transformation, a testament to how even the deepest sorrow can ultimately lead to profound wisdom and enduring change. And so, the kingdom of Aziza flourished, guided by the enduring lesson of Neka. Its prosperity was not merely economic, but spiritual, rooted in compassion and justice. The palace, once a gilded cage, became a symbol of accountability, its walls whispering tales of a maid whose silence spoke volumes, and whose suffering birthed a new era of enlightenment. The spirit of Neka, having found peace in the atonement and transformation of her tormentors, now watched over Aziza, an eternal vigil, ensuring the cycle of injustice would never repeat. Her story, a poignant blend of tragedy and redemption, remained the heartbeat of the kingdom, a reminder that true royalty lay in the heart's capacity for empathy and truth. The wind rustled through the Irako trees, carrying the faint, sweet scent of jasmine, a timeless whisper from the maid who became a spirit, who became a legend, guarding the soul of Aziza forever. Generations after Neka's time, a young princess named Aisha, destined to rule Aziza, found herself drawn to the memorial in the palace gardens. She would sit there for hours, lost in thought. Aisha had heard the stories of Neka since childhood, tales that instilled in her a deep sense of justice and responsibility, knowing the heavy price her ancestors had paid for their arrogance. One night, she dreamt of a woman with radiant skin and eyes filled with ancient wisdom, standing by her bedside. The woman did not speak, but her presence radiated a profound peace. In the dream, Aisha felt a gentle, cool hand touch her forehead, a soothing caress that filled her with an overwhelming sense of purpose and courage for her future reign. She awoke with tears in her eyes, knowing instinctively that the serene figure was Neka, the spirit of the palace maid, bestowing her blessing and wisdom upon the future queen of Aziza. As queen mother, Aisha ruled Aziza with the wisdom and compassion instilled by Neka's legacy. She never forgot the touch in her dream or the lessons of humility. She often consulted the oldest tales and the most senior elders, ensuring that the spirit of justice and empathy remained at the core of her decisions. The royal court, under Aisha's reign, was known for its fairness and its open ears, a direct contrast to the oppressive silence Neka had once suffered. She encouraged art and storytelling, ensuring that the historical truth of Aziza's past, including the dark chapters, was never glossed over or forgotten. Aisha was seen as a beacon of hope and strength, her reign a testament to the enduring power of learning from the past and striving for a better future, echoing Neka's transformative impact. Under Queen Aisha's rule, Aziza forged new and stronger alliances with neighboring kingdoms, not through forced marriages or military might, but through shared values and mutual respect. Ambassadors from distant lands would visit Aziza, marveling at its prosperity, its just governance, and the unique, almost spiritual aura that permeated its culture. They were intrigued by the story of Neka, a common maid whose spirit had reshaped a kingdom, a tale that taught them about the unseen forces that bind societies. These alliances brought peace and shared knowledge, fostering an era of unprecedented growth and understanding across the region, a direct contrast to the isolation caused by the initial curse. Aziza, once teetering on the brink of collapse, had become a shining example of a kingdom that embraced its past to build a truly enlightened future, with Neka's spirit as its guiding star. Queen Aisha expanded the palace gardens, transforming them into sprawling gardens of reflection, a place of serene beauty dedicated to peace and contemplation. The vibrant blooms stood as a contrast to the blight that had once swept the land. In the heart of these gardens, the original memorial to Neka stood, now surrounded by lush, vibrant flora, including a multitude of jasmine plants, their sweet scent ever present, a living tribute to her memory. The gardens became a favorite spot for the people, who were encouraged to visit and reflect on the lessons of humility and compassion that the kingdom had learned through great suffering. Children played among the blossoms, learning the story of the maid who, though silenced, ultimately gave her voice back to the entire kingdom, demanding truth where there had been deceit. The atmosphere of the gardens was one of profound tranquility, a lasting physical embodiment of the peace Neka's spirit had finally achieved through the royal family's centuries of atonement. The ancient Irako tree, where Prince Zikora and Neka had exchanged their fateful promises, remained a silent, colossal sentinel in the deepest corner of the palace grounds. It was treated with reverence, a place where no one spoke in jest, its deep shadows a reminder of the dangerous secrecy and the profound, broken oath that had initiated the curse. Generations of royal children were taken there and told the specific scene of betrayal, how the prince's ambition outweighed his love, and how that moment almost destroyed their entire civilization. Its massive roots, once entangled in betrayal, now seemed to hold the earth firmly, symbolizing the strong foundation of truth upon which the new Aziza was built. The tree stood not as a symbol of sorrow, but as a monument to the moment of choice, reminding all who saw it that every decision, no matter how small, carried weight, honor, and consequence. During a renovation of the old royal quarters, a small, intricately carved ivory trinket, the very one Prince Zikora had given Neka, was discovered, hidden deep within a cracked stone in the floor. The trinket, preserved perfectly despite the centuries, was recognized instantly by Queen Aisha from the oral histories and was brought to her as an important relic of the past. Aisha held the cold, smooth ivory, feeling the weight of the tragedy it represented, a small token of love that had led to so much heartache and vengeance. She decreed that the trinket would be placed in the palace museum, not as a crown jewel, but as this stone of broken promise, a tangible artifact of the human failure that Nekka's spirit had rectified. The display ensured that future generations would not only hear the story but could touch the relic, connecting them physically to the emotional truth and the devastating costs of betrayal. As Queen Aisha grew old and felt her own end approaching, she undertook a final, solitary pilgrimage to the outer wastes, to the spot where Nekka had died and where the gentle rain had first fallen. She carried no crown or scepter, only a simple earthen bowl filled with fresh water and a handful of jasmine petals from the gardens of reflection, her gifts an offering of eternal gratitude. Kneeling at the quiet spot, where the air was eternally calm, she spoke softly, not as a queen to a spirit, but as one woman to another, thanking Nekka for the profound lessons she had gifted Aziza. As she poured the water and scattered the petals onto the hallowed ground, a final, clear, high-pitched wail echoed across the wastes, not a cry of pain, but a sound of final, beautiful release. Aisha felt a rush of warmth, a profound peace, as if the last lingering tether of sorrow had been severed, and Nekka's spirit had finally, utterly, found its true rest, her work complete. On the day Queen Aisha passed away, a strange and moving event occurred within the palace. The carvings on the pillars, which had once wept dark moisture during the curse, began to weep again. But this time, the moisture was clear, shimmering like dew, and the carvings seemed to reflect a gentle, sorrowful light, mourning the loss of the queen who had so faithfully upheld Nekka's legacy. The people understood this sign immediately. The spirit of Nekka, the palace maid, wept for the good queen who had finally brought her story full circle, embodying the justice she had fought for. It was a day of shared, beautiful grief, binding the spirits, the royals, and the common people together in a shared history of sorrow and ultimate triumph. The weeping of the palace became a new tradition, an annual moment of reflection, recognizing the profound interconnectedness of their history, guided by the silent, powerful hand of the maid. The era that followed Queen Aisha's death was one of perpetual peace and deep prosperity, a golden age built upon the foundation of truth laid by a vengeful spirit and solidified by centuries of atonement. Aziza was known throughout the land as the Kingdom of Truth, where the memory of the wronged maid ensured that justice was swift and compassion was paramount in all rulings. The story of Nekka, once a tragic tale of betrayal, evolved into a powerful narrative of redemption, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unbreakable covenant between a ruler and their people. The chilling winds and spectral fears were banished forever, replaced by a quiet, enduring calm that settled over the land like a benediction, a permanent state of grace earned through collective sorrow. The children of Aziza grew up fearless, secure in the knowledge that their history, though painful, had taught their leaders the ultimate lesson: the humblest heart holds the greatest power. The final image is a sweeping, cinematic view of the kingdom of Aziza hundreds of years later, a vibrant, thriving society bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting sun. A young palace maid, humming a soft, ancient tune, tends to the jasmine vines growing over the memorial stone, her hands gentle, her eyes reflecting contentment. The name, Nekka, is never spoken by the royal family as a warning, but rather whispered by the people as a prayer, a reminder that the most sacred truths often come from the most unexpected places. The air is still and sweet, heavy with the scent of jasmine, a subtle, eternal fragrance that permeates the palace walls, a timeless breath from the spirit who sacrificed her life to teach a kingdom how to truly live. The vengeful spirit had finally achieved its ultimate goal, not just revenge, but restorative justice, forever cementing the memory of the silenced maid as the eternal, watchful conscience of the kingdom of Aziza. Please subscribe, comment, share, like for more videos.